Alton Towers. When you hear that name, you immediately think of, record-breaking thrills, pure adrenaline. It's the UK's go-to spot for that kind of sensory overload.
It absolutely is. And in 2013, they were ready to unleash what they thought was their masterpiece, a ride called the Smiler.
The Smiler. The whole concept was that it was designed, quite literally, to force a smile onto your face through G-forces and disorientation.
A really intense theme of enforced, relentless joy. But on the afternoon of June 2nd, 2015, that engineered smile it turned into absolute terror.
And what happened that day, it wasn't just a simple accident. It was this perfect storm of failures. You had bad weather, immense corporate pressure, human error.
And a deep, deep systemic breakdown of the safety protocols that are supposed to make these rides foolproof. It all led to one of the most infamous theme park disasters in UK history.
So today our mission is to do a deep dive into the Smiler disaster. We're going to trace that entire catastrophic chain of events.
Right. From the ride's huge ambition and its, frankly, troubled start, through the exact technical and human failures on the day, and then into the courtroom. And of course, the incredible stories of the survivors.
We've pulled from everything. The official investigation reports from the health and safety executive, the court documents, which are just minute by minute, and the really moving testimonies from the people who are on that ride.
Yeah, this isn't just about a machine breaking down. This is about how a system, a culture, allowed a machine designed for fun to cause such devastating, life-changing harm.
Let's get into it. So to really get the sheer scale of expectation around the Smiler, we have to talk about Alton Towers itself. This isn't some small local park.
No, not at all. It's an institution. It's the UK's most popular theme park, and it's run by Merlin Entertainments, which is a global giant in the attractions industry. They run things all over the world.
And the park itself has this really long, storied history, right? It wasn't always a theme park.
That's right. It goes all the way back to the 1800s. It started life as this grand lodge for the Earls of Shrewsbury. It only really became the theme park we know today back in 1980.
And from that point on, it kind of built its reputation on pushing the envelope.
Constantly. It became famous for building the biggest, the fastest, the first of its kind. And that tradition actually has an internal name, a kind of code name.
The secret weapon rides.
Exactly. The secret weapons. These are their blockbuster projects. The roller coasters designed to break world records or introduce some completely new technology to the market.
So these are the massive investments meant to grab headlines and pull in millions of people.
Precisely. And the Smiler, which was known inside the company as SW7, or Secret Weapon 7, was meant to be the absolute pinnacle of that tradition.
Okay, so let's talk about the machine itself. The specs on this thing they were built to shock.
Oh, they were. It was an £18 million investment. Just think about that, for a single ride. It was manufactured by the German company Gerstlauer, a very respected name in the industry, using their Infinity Coaster model.
And everything about it was designed for intensity.
And for volume, getting as many people through as possible. The track was 11,170 meters long, a really complex, twisted layout, and it hit a top speed of about 85 kilometers per hour, which is 53 miles per hour for us.
But the headline feature, the thing that got it in the record books, was the inversions.
The 14 inversions. At the time it was built, that was a world record. No other coaster had more. It was just relentless dive loops, corkscrews, one after the other.
And to get all that in, they had to use 2 lift hills. One of them was pretty unusual, wasn't it?
Very. The first lift hill was standard, classic chain lift. But the second one was a vertical climb. The train would lock in, and you'd be pulled straight up, literally on your back, staring at the sky before it dropped you into the second half of the circuit. It was incredibly disorienting.
And all of this mechanical intensity was wrapped up in this really elaborate, almost sinister theme. It's so ironic now, looking back.
The theming was central to the entire experience. They built this gigantic, 5-legged mechanical spider-like structure in the middle of the ride. They called it the Marmalizer.
The Marmalizer. What was the story behind that?
So the fiction was that this machine was run by a group dedicated to correcting people, to force them to smile.
Yeah.
The whole ride was framed as this brainwashing tool, using G-forces and flashing lights to, manipulate you into a state of permanent happiness.
Forced euphoria. It's a pretty dark concept for a theme park ride.
It is. And the marketing leaned into that dark humor heavily.
I remember the slogans. They were everywhere.
They were, and one in particular has just aged so horribly. The most famous one was, "Legs gone, voices hoarse, regrets absolutely none."
Wow.
Yeah. When you think about the catastrophic leg injuries that the victims in the front row suffered, that slogan just becomes this awful, painful piece of history. It really speaks to the arrogance surrounding the ride's safety.
It just feels like that confidence was misplaced from the very beginning. The ride had problems even before the crash, didn't it?
Oh, it had a very troubled launch. The Smiler was supposed to open in March of 2013, but that got pushed back several times. It finally opened at the very end of May.
What was the official reason for the delays?
The party line was unforeseen teething problems, but it was known to have frequent stoppages. It would leave riders stranded midair, sometimes for quite a while. There was even an incident during a press preview where journalists had to be evacuated from the lift hill.
So not a smooth start at all.
Not at all. It was an incredibly complex machine, and these issues suggest that maybe they hadn't given it enough time for testing and preparation before rushing it open.
And that high capacity, you mentioned 5 trains, 1,200 people an hour, that must have just piled on the pressure.
That's the vital piece of context here. That high throughput capability is a double-edged sword. For the park, it means maximizing revenue on their star attraction.
But for the staff,
For the staff, it means immense, relentless pressure to keep that 18 million pound machine running no matter what. Minimal downtime. As we get into the day of the crash, you'll see exactly how that pressure to make money tragically overrode basic caution.
okay, so let's set the scene. We're at Tuesday, June 2nd, 2015. It's a busy day at the park. It's the school holiday, so it's packed with people.
It's packed. But there's a critical factor at play that day that has nothing to do with the crowds. It's the weather. Specifically, the wind.
Right. Every roller coaster has wind speed limits, doesn't it?
They do, and they exist for a very good reason. The manufacturer, Gerstlauer, was explicit. The operational wind speed limit for the Smiler was 55 kilometers per hour, which is about 34 miles per hour.
Why is that limit so important?
Because strong headwinds can literally rob the train of its momentum. It acts like a brake, especially if a train is empty or lightly loaded. A strong gust at the wrong moment can cause it to not have enough speed to clear an element. It can stall.
And on June 2nd, the wind was much stronger than that limit.
Much, much stronger. Meteorological data from that day confirmed that wind speeds were peaking at 74 kilometers per hour. That's 46 miles per hour.
So well outside the safety envelope, not just a little bit over.
Substantially over, and the park knew it was windy. They had already shut down another attraction, the Skyride cable car system, because of the dangerous gusts. But the Smiler, their flagship ride, kept running.
That just seems like a huge, deliberate risk. To go directly against the manufacturer's own safety instructions, what could possibly explain that decision?
Well, the investigation and the court case that followed really exposed a corrosive corporate culture.
How so?
Testimony in court revealed that management had linked staff bonuses to what they called acceptably low levels of downtime.
So if the ride stopped for too long, their bonuses were affected.
Exactly. It created this high-pressure atmosphere where the staff at every level felt this unspoken pressure to keep the rides running, to prioritize throughput over the manufacturer's explicit safety guidelines. The system itself was actually incentivizing them to take risks.
This clash between safety and speed is the perfect backdrop for what happens next. At 1:40 p.m., there's an initial stoppage.
That's right. This involves what we'll call Train 3. It was dispatched from the station as an empty test train.
A test run.
Yes, but it was a flawed test run. The guidelines are very clear. When you're running test cycles, especially in bad weather, you're supposed to use water-filled dummies in the seats.
To simulate the weight of passengers.
Precisely. That weight adds mass, which adds momentum. That momentum is crucial for making sure the train can get through all 14 of those inversions, especially with a 46-mile-per-hour headwind.
And I'm guessing they didn't use the dummies.
They did not. So you have a completely empty, lightweight train fighting against extreme winds. And unsurprisingly, it didn't make it. Train 3 valleyed.
It got stuck.
It got stuck. It ran out of steam in the middle of an element called the batwing. It just didn't have the speed, rolled back a little, and came to a complete stop right at the lowest point of the track section, a section known as Block 3.
Now, at this exact moment, the ride's advanced safety computer, the system designed to prevent collisions, it did its job perfectly, right?
Absolutely perfectly. And this is so important to understand. The technology did not fail. Roller coaster safety is built on something called the block system.
Can you explain that?
Of course. Think of the track like a railway line. It's divided into sections or blocks. A fundamental rule is that only one train can be in any single block at any time. So when Train 3 got stuck in Block 3, the computer system immediately registered that block as occupied.
And it sent a signal to stop any other train from entering that section.
Exactly. It set a block stop fault, and it halted the next train. which was Train 4. And Train 4 was fully loaded with 16 passengers.
So Leah Washington, Joe Pugh, Vicky Balch, and all the others, they were held safely at the top of the first lift hill.
Yes. The system put them in a safe holding pattern. The physical failure had happened, the train had valleyed, but the automated safety net was fully engaged. The disaster hadn't happened yet. This is the precise moment where human intervention completely destroyed that safety net.
So let's get into that human intervention, the fatal override. 4 maintenance engineers are sent to deal with this block stop fault. What are they walking into?
They're walking into a situation where they're already at a massive disadvantage, and it's all because of systemic failures from management. First, and most critically, they believe there are only 4 trains operating on the ride that day.
But there were 5.
There were 5. Earlier that morning, to cope with the big crowds, management had decided to add a 5th train to the circuit Train 3, the one that got stuck. But that decision was never effectively communicated down the chain to all the operational and maintenance staff.
So when they get this block stop warning, they look at their monitors, they can account for the 4 trains they think are running.
Exactly. They can see the 4 trains they know about, none of which are in Block 3. But the computer is still screaming that Block 3 is occupied. This creates a huge contradiction for them.
And they had seen this kind of error before, hadn't they?
They had. Because the Smiler had this troubled history with glitches, the engineers had previously dealt with something they called ghost trains.
Yeah.
This was a software bug where the system would sometimes show a block as occupied even after the train had safely passed through.
So they make a catastrophic assumption.
A disastrous leap of logic. They assume that this very real, very physical stationary train stuck on the track is just another software glitch, a ghost in the machine.
They mistook a real hazard for a phantom one.
And that misdiagnosis was made even easier by the physical setup of the control room.
The investigation really focused on the CCTV and the visibility issues, didn't it?
It did, heavily. The control room had feeds from 25 different cameras, but they were all displayed on these small, crowded screens. Staff later testified it was incredibly hard to see details.
And there was a blind spot.
A critical blind spot. The way the coaster's own structure was built, a huge A-shaped support column and some other track supports, perfectly blocked the view of the last few cars of the stranded Train 3 from the control room's main camera angle for that section.
So they glanced at the screens, didn't see what they would recognize as a full train, and it just confirmed their bias.
It confirmed their theory that it had to be a ghost train. They didn't see anything to challenge their assumption.
And then came the final, irreversible mistake, the decision to manually override the safety system.
This was the point of no return. The engineers, acting without needing to get authorization from the senior manager, which was another huge systemic flaw, and working from inadequate training that was mostly learned by just shadowing other engineers, they decided to reset the block.
They basically told the computer, ignore that warning. The track is clear.
They performed what's called a block reset. They essentially deleted the stranded Train 3 from the system's memory. They did this without performing a full physical walk of the track to visually confirm it was clear, which should have been mandatory.
And at 1.51 and 5 seconds, what happened?
They put the system into EVAS mode. This mode is designed to clear the track by sending any stop trains around the circuit. The computer, now blind to the stalled train and believing all the blocks were clear, did exactly what it was told to do. It released the brakes on Train 4.
The one with 16 people on board?
The one with 16 people on board. The chain lift engaged, pulled it over the crest of the hill, and sent it down that 53-mile-per-hour drop. From that second, the collision was absolutely inevitable.
It took less than 30 seconds. At 1.51 and 31 seconds, the 2 trains collide.
A fully loaded train, full of people, slams into an empty stationary one. Now, the speed at impact wasn't actually that high. It was estimated at around 20 miles per hour, but the transfer of energy was immense.
The prosecution in court used a pretty powerful analogy to describe the force, didn't they?
They did, and it's chilling. They said the impact was equivalent to a 1.5-ton family car crashing into a wall at 90 miles per hour. The steel carriages just crumpled.
Eyewitnesses described the sound.
They said it was an ear-splitting crunch, just this horrible metallic sound followed by screaming. People said it was like something from a horror movie, just pure, absolute terror.
And all of that force was concentrated on the front row.
They took the brunt of it. The front of their carriage, where their legs were, was just compressed and crushed against the back of the stationary train. There's a metal shield on the front, and it just folded inwards like an accordion, trapping their lower limbs with incredible force.
Let's talk about the people in that front row. Leah Washington and Joe Pugh. They were on a first date.
Yeah, just kids, really. Leah was 17, Joe was 18, and their testimony gives us this terrifying first-person view of that moment.
What did Leah remember?
She remembered that split second of realization. As they came around a bend after the big drop, she suddenly saw the empty carriage just sitting there, right in front of them. And her first instinct, just this pure human reaction, was to put her hands out in front of her, as if she could somehow stop this massive steel object.
A completely futile, automatic response to an impending disaster.
And then the impact. She said she looked down immediately and just saw. She saw flesh on the seat in front of her. She could feel the bone in her knee, and she knew instantly how badly she was hurt. Her first thought wasn't even about the pain. It was just sheer panic that she's going to bleed to death right there on the ride.
And her injuries were just catastrophic.
Life-altering. Leah Washington's left leg had to be amputated above the knee. She also had a severely fractured hand. Joe Pugh, sitting right next to her, had both of his kneecaps shattered and a permanent injury to one of his fingers. The shared trauma of that day bonded them in a way that's almost impossible to imagine.
They weren't the only ones in that row to suffer such terrible injuries. There was also Vicky Balch.
Vicky Balch, who was 19. She also required an amputation of her right leg below the knee. She later talked about how the crash had just stolen her future, particularly her dream of becoming a dancer. She became a very vocal advocate for shutting the ride down for good.
And the injuries weren't just confined to amputations or the very front row?
No, the force was transmitted through the whole train. Daniel Thorpe suffered a collapsed lung and a fractured leg. Another passenger, Chandavan Chauhan, had serious internal injuries, a damaged liver, blood clots. It was just widespread, severe trauma.
And after that horrific impact, their ordeal was far from over. They were trapped. And not just trapped, but suspended in the air.
It's just layer upon layer of trauma. They're stuck about 7 meters or 24 feet off the ground, angled downwards. And that section of the ride is built over this big concrete pit, making it incredibly difficult to get to.
So they were up there in agony while this spectacle unfolded below them.
For 4 to 5 hours. Suffering what they described as indescribable pain, trapped by twisted metal and the ride's own restraints, while crowds of park-goers gathered below, filming, taking pictures, not really understanding the life-or-death situation playing out just above their heads.
The rescue operation itself, the delays in just getting help to them are staggering when you look at the timeline.
The timeline is shocking. It really highlights a complete breakdown in the park's emergency response. So the crash happens at 1:51 p.m. The first 999 call to emergency services doesn't happen for another 17 minutes. It's placed at 2:08 p.m.
17 minutes just to make the call.
And then, because of the park's remote location and size, the first paramedics don't physically arrive on the scene until 2:37 p.m. That's nearly 50 minutes after the crash.
And when they finally get there, the location of the crash turns the rescue into a logistical nightmare.
A complete nightmare. That concrete pit meant the rescue teams, including 25 firefighters from Staffordshire Fire and Rescue, had to build a temporary platform out of scaffolding just to reach the victims.
And once they were up there, the carriages themselves fought back.
They did. The steel is designed to withstand incredible forces, which means it's incredibly difficult to cut through. And the medics, they were performing emergency procedures while the victims were still pinned in the wreckage 24 feet in the air.
I read one of them compared it to a game.
Yeah, one medic said it was like playing Jenga with human beings. The victims were so twisted and trapped. Leah Washington was losing a catastrophic amount of blood, and they had to give her multiple blood transfusions right there in the carriage. They later said that's what saved her life.
And the whole extraction took hours.
An excruciatingly long time. Leah was the last of the front row passengers to be freed. It took over 4 hours to cut her out. The toll on everyone, the victims and the rescuers, was just immense.
So once the victims are finally rescued and on their way to the hospital, the focus shifts to blame, to accountability. The Health and Safety Executive, the HSE, they step in immediately.
They do. They issue a prohibition notice, which shuts the ride down instantly. And their investigation very quickly starts to dismantle that initial convenient narrative of it just being human error.
Right, because Merlin Entertainment's, the parent company, initially tried to place the blame squarely on those 4 engineers.
They did. But the judge, Michael Chambers, QC, he completely rejected that defense during the sentencing. And his words are really the key to understanding this entire case.
What did he say?
He stated, and I'm quoting here, "Human error was not the cause. The underlying fault was an absence of a structured and considered system, not that of individuals' efforts, doing their best within a flawed system."
So the fault wasn't the individuals, it was the broken system they were forced to work in.
Precisely. That ruling was a landmark. It shifted the blame from the employees to the employer. The engineers made a mistake, yes, but they were only able to make that catastrophic mistake because the company had failed to create a safe system for them to operate within.
So let's dig into those specific systemic flaws that the HSE report found. It was a huge document,
It's
right?
over 250 pages. And it laid the blame on what it called manifestly inadequate management governance. It boiled down to 4 major interconnected failures.
Okay, what was the first one?
First, as we've covered, was the decision to run the ride in winds that were far beyond the manufacturer's official limit.
Yeah.
That was a direct violation of procedure, and it was driven by that pressure to keep the ride open.
The second flaw was about the engineers themselves.
It was their training, or rather, the lack of it. They learned their jobs mostly by shadowing other staff. There was no formal, documented training on how to handle a complex fault, like a valleyed train, and crucially, no clear step-by-step process for resetting the block system safely.
So they were essentially left to figure it out on their own.
In a high-pressure situation, yes. The third major failure was communication. That breakdown where the engineers were never told that a 5th train had been added to the track.
Which is what led them to think it was a ghost train in the first place.
Exactly. It was a critical piece of missing information that completely warped their decision-making process. And finally, the 4th point was just general governance and oversight.
What did that involve?
It was basic stuff. The investigation found that 2 of the 4 engineers on the scene hadn't even read the ride's own risk assessment documents. The company had failed to make sure its own staff understood the fundamental safety protocols for the machine they were in charge of. The judge said it was a whole series of unchecked mistakes.
And the financial and corporate fallout from this was immediate, and it was huge.
It was astronomical, a real wake-up call for the entire industry. Alton Towers closed for several days right after the crash, which cost them an estimated £500,000 a day in lost revenue.
And Merlin had to warn its investors.
They did. They issued a public profit warning, saying the crash could wipe up to £47 million from their profits that year because of closures and, a massive drop in public confidence.
And did visitor numbers actually drop?
Well, absolutely.
Yeah.
In the year that followed, visitor numbers fell by 11.4%. People were scared. Legally, the company, Merlin Attractions Operations, pleaded guilty to breaching health and safety laws.
And the fine was pretty substantial.
They were fined £5 million. It was actually reduced from $7.5 million because they entered an early guilty plea. But the judge made it clear that the victims were fortunate not to have been killed and that the whole thing was needless and avoidable.
And there were job losses too, weren't there?
Yes, the restructuring that followed led to 98 jobs being cut. It was a massive financial and structural blow to the company.
So after the fine and the public condemnation, Merlin had to do something drastic to try and win back public trust. They had to overhaul their safety systems.
Completely. And not just on the Smiler. This triggered a company-wide review. They ended up implementing 30 different safety changes across all their multi-car roller coasters around the world.
A systemic problem needed a systemic solution.
Exactly. They finally realized that the same flaws could exist anywhere in their operation.
So what were the specific changes they made to the Smiler to make sure an engineer could never just delete a train again?
A few key things. First, proper documented training became mandatory. No more shadowing. Second, they installed more CCTV cameras to get rid of that blind spot that the A-frame support created.
And the most important change?
A new layer of authorization. Now, no manual override of the block system can happen unless a senior manager comes to the site, physically confirms the track is clear with their own eyes, and then signs off on it. It adds that crucial human check that was missing.
So 8 months later, in March 2016, the Smiler reopened.
It did. Operationally, it was the same ride, but they did make some changes to the theming. They toned down some of the more aggressive stuff about correction and mind control, clearly acknowledging the new, painful context of the ride.
And let's go back to the victims. Of course, no amount of money can ever make up for what they went through, but they did receive settlements to help with their future.
They did. All the seriously injured victims received multi-million-pound payouts. And this is essential, not just as compensation, but for their lifelong care. For Leah Washington, for example, a state-of-the-art prosthetic leg costs around £60,000 and needs replacing every few years. The settlement ensures she'll have access to the best possible technology for the rest of her life.
But their legacy is so much more than the financial side of it. It's the advocacy and the resilience they've shown.
Absolutely. They've turned this unimaginable tragedy into a platform. Vicky Balch has spoken so openly about her recovery and has become a powerful voice for amusement park safety. And Leah has also become a public figure, showing her story to raise awareness.
And at the heart of this whole story is the relationship between Leah and Joe, the couple on their first date.
Their story is just incredible. It's a real testament to the human spirit. After the crash, they actually drifted apart for a little while, which is understandable given the intense trauma and media focus.
But they came back together.
They did. They realized that nobody else on Earth could possibly understand what they had been through together. That shared experience became the foundation of their relationship.
And their life together has blossomed from that tragedy.
It really has. Joe proposed to Leah in Italy in 2022. And then, in May of 2024, almost 9 years to the day after the crash, they got married.
That's an amazing end to that chapter of their story.
Leah has said that even though their lives were changed forever, the trauma actually strengthened their bond, and they couldn't be happier. They've even used their story to give back.
How so?
They host charity events to raise money for organizations like the Air Ambulance, who saved Leah's life that day, and for charities that support other amputees. They've found a way to create something positive from the absolute worst day of their lives.
But even with the happy endings and the safety changes, the story of the Smiler is still, at its core, a massive warning.
It's the ultimate case study in safety complacency. It proved that you can have the most advanced technology in the world, but if the corporate culture is flawed, if bonuses are tied to uptime, if training is inadequate, that system will fail.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's clear the real catastrophe here wasn't just a mechanical glitch.
Not at all.
It was the entire organizational environment, the culture that allowed human operators to override the very safety systems that were there to protect everyone.
Right. Even the most sophisticated computer is only as strong as the human protocols and the culture of accountability that supports it.
And I think the core idea we're left with, the final thought, really comes down to the concept of trust, doesn't it?
It really does. Every single time you or I or anyone steps onto an extreme ride, we are performing an act of complete trust. We willingly suspend our disbelief and place our lives in the hands of the operators.
We trust that the thrill is built on a foundation of absolute, unshakable safety.
And the Smiler crash forces us to ask a really important question. What level of scrutiny should we, the public, demand? Not just of the machines, the steel, and the sensors, but of the corporate culture, the business pressures, the training systems that govern the people who run those machines.
Because that culture of safety is the final fail-safe.
It's the one thing you can never, ever override. Meticulous human training and clear, accountable decision-making. That's the ultimate safety system.
A painful lesson learned at a devastating cost. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Thank you.